Today, we're going to learn about JavaScript objects. Let's get started. Hey there everyone, and welcome back to Web Dev with Loop Coding Center. Today, we're going to continue on the subject of JavaScript and focus specifically on objects. Last week, we touched on variables and statements and how creating a variable involves the creation of a statement. This week, we'll use statements to make objects. Objects are a little different, and a little different than variables because they can hold multiple bits of information instead of just a single value. We've actually run a couple of experiments on the structure of an object, and we've talked about the nature of the object-oriented programming that JavaScript offers. So with that, we'll go ahead and start a fresh new code pen today, just so that we can focus on the objects and really focus on the syntax that comes with objects and the types of objects that we can make. So let's get started. In order to begin with the creation of an object, we'll actually follow the exact same syntax that we used for a statement of any kind. So here we'll go ahead and start with a variable of, let's say, a fruit. And my fruit will be an orange. With my orange, I'll go ahead and declare a value. And like so, I'll just type a string of orange. Like that, we already have our object declared. Now, earlier I talked about an object being something with multiple values placed into it. However, an object can also be something with only a single value, because an object can go from 1 to an almost infinite amount. But now we'll actually dive into the practical object, the object that actually has multiple items inside of it. So, in order to begin with that, what we'll do is change our syntax by declaring the orange equal to a pair of brackets instead of just a value. This way, we'll be able to encapsulate all of our values inside of these brackets, which makes it easier to read the code, as well as keeping it contained within a certain area in our code as well. Just for the practice of today, I'll also define the object like this. In some instances, you might find keeping your statement in a single line might make more sense for the project you're working on, but in this instance, we'll go ahead and spread it out between lines just to make it more readable. So to begin with our first object, we'll start with the concept of objectification. We're going to create this object with the idea that we'll have other objects with similar classifications or properties in mind. For example, in this example that we're using right now, I'm going to name off a couple of different fruits or anticipate creating multiple fruit, but just to get started with the basics, we'll pass our first property value for our object. So, to begin with that, what we'll do is go ahead and set a property value we want to classify. So, for a first example, we can go ahead and set color. With the classification, with the value of color, not with a simple colon, we can go ahead and set the value equal to orange because it is an orange. You can be fancy with the name too if you'd like. And then to finish the statement, well, not finish the statement since everything from line 1 to 5 is the entire statement, but to continue in the creation of the property values, what we'll do is go ahead and set another value, and in this case we'll set shape. And again, same syntax as the value before, just always make sure to set a comma after you've declared a value, which is a simple structure of the name of the value, followed by a colon, and then the value as a variable, or the input. So, in this case, orange, and then the descriptor round, and you're not limited to just strings in this case. You can also use numbers. So I'll set a value of count, and with this I'll set a value of 4. And like that, we have our first object, and in a sense, our first object literal. We'll touch on what that means later on in the series, however. Now that we have an object set up, let's go ahead and look into exactly what we can already do with what's available. Or really just how we can mess around with the object. We could continue, and you can practice by making a couple of more objects, but I'll focus on showing you how you can use and manipulate this object now that you have it. So, as an example that you should be familiar with by now, we'll go ahead and set a console.log, and here we'll enter in the value of orange. With that, we'll go ahead and set the semicolon so that when the console prints out, we'll be able to see the value of orange and its properties underneath. So we'll open up our console like so, and by going to the actual console printout and getting our orange to print out, which may require a refresh of the page, we'll see that our object printed out. Here we have the properties of the color, the shape, and the count all printing out for us. But let's say we're running a machine and we actually only want one of the objects. To do so, we can go ahead and actually add a class or call out a specific class or the value that we defined. So in order to do that, what we'll do is go ahead and add a period after the orange and then call out for the property of color. With this, what we'll be able to do is only print out the color. If we wanted the count, we would change our value to count, not count, and like so, we'll get the number 4. That way, we can go into an object and only get the data we need, which will be really important when it comes to the processing of data with JavaScript. So with that, we'll actually cap off the day, just to not dive too deep. But really, what the important takeaway of this lesson are the syntax that come with the creation of an object, as well as how to call for certain information and bits inside of it. In the next episode, we'll learn about a couple of functions and really methods that we can place inside of our objects to bring a couple of powers and or uses for the objects that we create. With that, we'll also touch on how we can manipulate data inside of objects and how we can use that for simple processing that might require large libraries, which are essentially just code bases, later on in your future development. But with that, we've touched on all the topics of object creation, the syntax, and the use today, and we'll wrap up the episode. So until then, have a nice week.